Hi, everyone. I think we're just waiting on a couple more people. I don't see our community members have logged in yet. But I know they're planning on. So I think just a few more minutes until we can get started.
Yes, sounds good.
Morning, everyone.
Morning, Julia. We're waiting a couple of minutes for the community members. Janice, have you heard from them? Janice?
Sorry about that. I did text them this morning to confirm, but I haven't heard back. But
There's Caroline.
okay, there we go.
Okay, great. Okay, I'll wait one more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll get started. Okay, I would like to call to order the audit committee meeting. Thank you all for coming this morning. I would like to welcome each of you to the audit committee. We will start the meeting with introductions. My name is Patty Sullivan. I am a member of the PPS board and chair of the audit committee. Stormy, would you mind starting off the introductions? And when you introduce yourself, could you also introduce the bond auditors as well?
Yes, thanks, Patty. I'm Stormy Shanks. I'm the Senior Director of the Office of School Modernization. Schoberg Evishant Consulting is our third-party bond performance auditor. And here today to present their Year 6 performance audit is Kathy Brady.
Okay, Kathy, could you introduce yourself and then call on somebody else who hasn't introduced himself yet?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. I'm like Stormy said, I'm Kathy Brady with Schoberg Evishant Consulting, a partner with the firm, and we've been doing the bond audits this is our 6th audit cycle. And I'll ping it over to Janice.
Good morning. I'm Janice Hansen, District's Internal Performance Auditor.
And call on someone else, Janice.
I'll call on Eddie.
Yeah. Eddie Wong, board chair, audit committee member. Thank you. And Roseanne Powell is also here too.
And call on somebody who hasn't introduced himself.
Oh, let's go with Deborah.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Deborah Kafori, the Chief of Staff here at PPS, and I will introduce Michelle.
Good morning, Michelle Morrison, Chief Financial Officer. Glad to see everyone here.
Julia?
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Julia Brim Edwards, board member, and I'm audit committee member, and I feel a little bit like full circle since one of my first actions when I got on the board was the hiring of the bond auditor. So it's nice to have it be one of my last actions. And I'll call on Caroline.
Hello, I'm Caroline Zavakovsky. I'm a community member on the audit committee.
Okay, and I think all that's left is Kara, who we all know, of course, but you can introduce yourself anyway.
Hi, Kara Bradshaw, Executive Assistant.
Okay, thank you, everybody, for being here. And Carolyn, I'd especially like to thank you for your input on Janice's evaluation. Really appreciated that. So thanks again for being here. Audit committee meetings are typically scheduled at 5 p.m. So I just want to make sure to communicate that 5 p.m. meetings will continue to be the usual practice. Hopefully today's meeting is the rare exception. Caroline and Jennifer hasn't made it yet, but especially Caroline, I'd like to thank you for accommodating today's meeting in the middle of your normal workday. Okay, let's get started. The primary purpose of today's meeting is for our external bond auditors to provide the Year 6 Annual Bond Performance Audit Report. I also want to note that we schedule this meeting with plenty of time for questions. I would like to give the bond auditors an opportunity to do their presentation first, and then we will have time for questions. Stormy, thank you for introducing our bond auditors. Do you have anything else you want to say before we invite the auditors to give their presentation?
The staff here in OSM really appreciate the attention to detail and the approach that Schoberg Evishing took with this audit and appreciate the feedback.
So on to the bond auditor.
Excellent. Okay, well, I will attempt to share a presentation. I'm not a technical bond auditor. Let's see. Okay, can everyone see that? Ooh.
Yep.
Okay, I can't see it, so just please shout out if I need to do something different. So, okay, let's get started. So good morning, everyone on the audit committee and everyone on the call today. Again, my name is Kathy Brady with Schoberg Evishing, here to present the results of what is our Year 6 Annual Bond Performance Audit. It's covering the period July 2023 through June 2024, but we do have updates in certain areas through February 2025. When I presented before to the committee last December, I shared a background of our firm and the bond audits in general, as well as some results for those prior audits. But since you've heard it before, I'm just going to get right to today's presentation on the Year 6 audit. As you can see on this slide, we focused on 5 main areas: bond delivery status for both the 2017 and 2020 bonds, project management over the 2020 infrastructure projects, bond staffing, bond oversight, and follow-up on prior audit recommendations. There's a lot to cover, so let's get into some of the details. In the first report section, we discuss progress on the 2017 bond program and its projects. It's a step we perform every year to determine status and conduct a high-level review if there are significant variances with budget, schedule, or key scope. So, it's not meant to be a deep root cause analysis of variances, but we do look at underlying information in greater depth depending on the circumstances. Overall, we found for the 2017 projects, PPS is nearing completion of the pledged bond work, having completed McDaniel and Lincoln High Schools, Kellogg Middle School, and most of the health and safety projects at multiple school sites. We found, in fact, that Lincoln High School, PPS expects to have more than $16.9 million in savings. That amount changes depending on invoices coming in, but that amount grew from savings previously noted last year. So as the time that we finished our audit work this year, No decisions had been made yet on where or how those savings would be applied to other bond areas. So in terms of cost, the 2017 bond projects will require about $898 million compared to the initial $790 million. But the difference is covered by bond premium, interest, and some grants that PPS was able to secure. Let's see, do I have a say? Okay. Moving on. When looking at schedule, we found that Benson was opened in August 2024, although there was work that remained incomplete and there were issues related to several building areas. Because these significant events occurred after our scope period and were sort of ongoing through February 2025, we extended our audit efforts. Again, not a root cause analysis per se, but we did do additional audit tasks for this objective. We found project work was not complete. Some project work was not complete when the school opened. Some of it included damage from a flood that you're all aware of, caused by pump failure right before the school opened, impacting the main gym, locker rooms, some other ancillary rooms. And there were also outstanding issues related to boilers, elevators, security, fire alarms, some other elements as well. We found that the certain schedule and scope issues on the project started in 2023, about midway through construction, caused by some scheduled activities taking longer than planned, some unforeseen conditions, which is very typical on capital projects, as you know, design and coordination misses, some constructability misses, among other things. Excuse me. We also found that disagreements existed between PPS and its general contractor regarding the cause of the unfinished work, as well as with interpretations of contract provisions. We did find that to mitigate risk, OSM employed typical industry followed project management techniques based on the project files we reviewed, such as raising concerns and perceived noncompliance with its architects and contractors. When the audit ended, or when we had to end our audit, it was anticipated that costs would continue to grow for Benson, but there would be available bond contingency to help with costs at that time. So to strengthen future project delivery, better manage risks, we made 5 recommendations to PPS in this section. The first one was to perform a postmortem on Lincoln and Benson before the next modernization projects enter construction to apply any lessons learned. We also recommended that PPS clarify contract terms, such as defining what constitutes noncompliance, how it's measured, as well as set expectations with its contractor early during contract negotiations or before the start of construction, in addition to completing and discussing contractor evaluations after project completion. Lastly, we recommend formalizing plans to reallocate some of those project cost savings from Lincoln to other bond areas. The next report section is similar, but discusses overall status for the 2020 bond program, which had similar areas as the 2017 bond, but also added some new bond categories, as you know, curriculum technology, the Center for Black Student Excellence. And we found that the 2020 bond projects were, getting completed, but there was several areas that have some delays or higher than expected future project costs. Nothing over budget at this point, but there's some increased risk that those projects may not be completed as planned. When looking at the 2020 status, we also found this is Jefferson, Cleveland, Ida B. Wells. Obviously, there's some significant events that occurred after our scope period, so we did conduct some additional efforts and updates into February 2025. For instance, we found that changing designs and requirements on the Jefferson High School significantly impacted cost and schedule, with those projected future costs growing from $366 million to $491 million as of December 2024. At the time, project schedules also showed the school opening would be delayed from a summer of 2026 until summer of 2028 based on that design rework. Likewise, for the other 2 schools, Ida B. Wells and Cleveland, project estimates received from both the general contractor and PPS's third-party estimators showed future and the total project costs that would be higher than expected when the bond was passed. And similarly, they had schedules that showed those schools experienced some delayed openings as well. In response, as you know, PPS paused Jefferson, Cleveland, and Ida B. Wells to conduct the cost reduction studies and set target values, requiring about $1 million in reductions at each school. And while cost reduction is always a good thing for project delivery, the targets seem unlikely to be met without some significant project scope changes. So at the end of our audit, we had to stop, like I said, in February with our field work. The proposed cost reduction estimates that were coming in at that time from the project teams were well off that target number. Also, the timing of the cost reduction exercises does increase the risk of future delays or further delays, I should say, in the school openings from the pause in work and the redesigns that are needed. And then that also increases the risk that might be additional costs from those delays. The longer you wait, the higher construction costs seem to rise each year, and the impact of tariffs. So they're all factors that need to be considered that could potentially negate any identified cost reductions. To improve controls and better manage risk, with the 2020 bond program, we made 5 recommendations that included more clearly communicating and summarizing results from those cost reduction efforts for the board as to what features are above ed specs or design standards, among other things. We recommend making clear recommendations to the board regarding the cost reduction options, itemizing the estimates for additional inflationary costs, the cost of redesign, any impacts on construction schedules. So all that information is clear and available for the board. We also recommend that PPS use its external construction auditor, which is different than us as the bond performance auditors. That auditor is much more project specific, and we're recommending that they look at the general contractor labor burden rates and general conditions before price is negotiated at the GMP stage for future projects. And then finally, we just recommend that PPS regularly keep updating the board on future project cost variances and give recommended actions of what to do with those. Moving on, looking at the status of other 2020 bond areas, we found that curriculum projects were on target as planned, but technology projects faced some schedule challenges, with classroom modernizations not scheduled for completion until 2029, got pushed out several years. Mostly it's due to prior issues with whiteboards that set the schedule back, and as well as a type of procurement method that was used that had some additional constraints during COVID. Finally, we found that the Center for Black Student Excellence continued to be stalled with no schedule updates since 2020. During our field work, there was still no data available to us for the what, where, and when capital improvements would be made for the CBSE bond area. And the risks related to that is the longer these efforts are delayed, cost escalation could impact, what is able to be provided for that $60 million bond allocation. And then the risks are higher that the expected outcomes for CBSE might not be realized. Since we have made recommendations in prior audits related to the CBSE area, this year we only made one additional recommendation, and that is to accelerate decisions regarding the CBSE. Moving on to the next report section, we reviewed project management of the 2020 physical improvement infrastructure projects related to roofs, seismic features, security, fire, special education, ADA compliance, etc. The bond itself did not promise specific quantities of improvements or name specific sites where improvements would occur, but PPS had plans and a variety of projects to meet those infrastructure needs using those funds. So to select and prioritize projects, we found that PPS followed its established criteria based on its long-range facility plan, facility condition assessments, and additional studies in specific areas that considered student enrollment, zoning, safety, and a variety of other considerations. Results also showed that progress was being made with most projects completed as planned, although a few had modest delays and budget issues. Specifically, some mechanical, security, and seismic projects had modest delays of a year or so, nothing significant. And the ADA special education projects were over budget. Again, not significantly, and really no big negative impacts on plan improvements across the schools. In fact, most of the ongoing infrastructure are slated for completion by the end of 2025, although certain mechanical control upgrade projects won't be done until fall 2026. We also found that PPS project management aligned with industry practices. Procurements followed statutes and PPS's own policy for competitive awards and securing qualified bidders. Based on our review of 10 projects, PPS employed cost management controls over contractor invoices and change orders that we would expect to see, and that aligns with industry standards. So we don't have any recommendations in this area. Moving on, we were also tasked with looking at bond program staffing. So we set out to identify workload in terms of tasks and functions, and then identify staff capacity to meet that workload with the goal of assessing whether staffing was adequate to handle bond program workload, whether staff was underutilized or whether staff was overburdened. That would, potentially increase the risk of critical tasks not being completed. We found that PPS did not have formal protocols or methodologies for determining staff needs in terms of hours of workload, which is what we were looking for, that quantitative factor, or gauging staff resources against quantifiable effort needed. For instance, when looking at workload, there were estimation practices in place that used project dollars and responsibilities as a baseline for setting needs for individual projects. OSM tracked tasks needed to complete a project and people assigned to those projects during certain calendar periods. But its spreadsheets and tools used did not estimate the duration of hours or hours required for each of those tasks. In terms of estimating staffing capacity available, OSM relied on its project responsibility matrix and staff assignments as a foundation and adjusted plans in collaboration with its staff as work progressed. Yet, from an audit perspective, without data for quantifying workload and then staff capacity against that workload, we could not determine whether staffing assignments aligned with the effort needed or whether staff were overutilized or underutilized. So to ensure staffing is sufficient to meet that growing bond workload, we made 3 recommendations in this area for PPS. To estimate workload using some type of predetermined task levels and assigning how long in terms of hours it expected the efforts would take. We also recommended that PPS track staff time against the developed predetermined task levels or some other method to quantifiably capture that effort. And then we recommend that PPS compare staff capacity against that estimated workload to identify the gaps for under or overutilization of staff, sort of that piece that we were unable to do. Okay, moving on to bond oversight. We focused on the overarching framework. We looked at the roles and activities of the board, the School Facilities Improvement Oversight Committee, and BAC. We looked at the nature of the oversight and discussions and meetings. So in terms of the overall framework, we found this structure aligned with others we reviewed. Although the roles and responsibilities of the SFIOC, I'm going to acronym that, were unclear with no charter or operating protocols to really set expectations and their role compared to the full board, since there are board members on both. We found that members engaged in important discussions surrounding a variety of critical bond topics. So that was there. But there was some bond data that was not provided to the board or the BAC. For instance, the board did not receive BAC quarterly reports, which are required by BAC charter. And neither the board or the BAC consistently received our annual bond performance audits or the project-specific construction auditor results. Some of those can be confidential information, but some of the results and even knowing what they do could give additional assurance for the board of the types of things that are going on and part of the project delivery. Related to providing information to the board for oversight, we also found that while the SFIOC actively engaged in bond activities, there weren't always regular updates to the full board or frequent recommendations. There were some, but some of the other committees had more regular updates to the board. Likewise, we found that PPS staff provided a lot of bond information to the board, although we do believe some slight enhancement could improve that information by creating a 1 to 2 page summary, maybe of what board actions are needed for matters being brought before the board. Is it for approval only? Is it information? Is it feedback? As well as having a quick, brief narrative outlining pros and cons and impacts of decisions. Additionally, because many bond areas are outside of OSM's purview, who, Stormy sort of functions as the center, areas such as curriculum and technology, the Center for Black Student Excellence, the PPM could benefit from a project management office function to enhance oversight of the bond. Some others in industry use it, not everyone, that oversees large capital programs. They employ a PMO type approach to support their similar bond-like programs. And it helps facilitate activities and compliance across an entity when several units are involved, and allows the PMO able to respond and assist stakeholders, sometimes more quickly. Another benefit of it is that it can alleviate some of the administrative burden on the capital project staff that have to do all of these administrative and important tasks, but it can allow them to focus on their primary responsibility, implementing capital projects. For this scope area, we made 9 recommendations in total to improve information available to decision makers. 5 of these are specific to the areas I just talked about and include defining the role and communication protocols of the SFIOC, providing the BAC reports to the board, and also providing the annual bond performance audit reports and construction audit reports to the oversight groups. We also had a recommendation for enhancing the staff board reports to summarize those actions needed, options, recommendations, impacts of decisions, things like that. And finally, a recommendation for creating a PMO function to coordinate the bond program activities. Looking at just the BAC oversight provided, we found that its responsibilities align with some others that we've reviewed. Some have a little bit more responsibilities, some have less. And with the bond program continuing to grow, there could be benefits from a stronger BAC role through greater involvement. This could include small things such as providing the BAC with the same PPS staff analysis that it's given to the board or to the SFIOC, so that the BAC has the opportunity to look at it and provide more detailed feedback and insight based on its technical expertise that could provide that both to the BAC, the PPS and the board. Another benefit of providing BAC's objective technical perspective is that it gives the board an independent point of view on bond progress and additional assurance of how PPS is managing and delivering projects. In fact, having a greater involvement is in line with BAC's charter. There's responsibilities in there say that the BAC may advise the board on technical areas such as alignment of activities with the long-range facility plan or ways to address seismic issues, even ADA compliance, among other areas. We also looked at BAC protocols and activities. We found that written meeting minutes were not available during our audit, not for us or for the committee members themselves. And, without those written meeting minutes, it's easy for confusion to occur with past discussions or action items that can get lost, such as we saw, what occurred with the BAC had several past requests to provide their quarterly reports to the board or to get help with fill-in vacancies, which took some time to happen. They're written now, so that's good. They implemented the recommendation early. But speaking of the vacancies, we found the BAC had significant vacancies for 2 years. although they now have full membership. So that's the beauty and the curse of doing the ongoing audits, because as soon as you write something up, it's fixed. But truly, that is the reason to do them as things are going on, right? So we made 4 recommendations to PPS related to the BAC activities. That included strengthening the role of the BAC, recommendations for improving protocols such as voting and giving their feedback to the report more directly, documenting BAC meeting minutes in writing, which I mentioned is already done, and for formalizing recruiting practices. For the final area, as we do each year, the year 6 audit included a follow-up on prior audit recommendations. The report itself has a table that summarizes all the outstanding recommendations by year and by category, as well as provides an implementation status for each of the recommendations as of December 2024. Overall, we found progress has been made. Still about 38% of the recommendations are outstanding. Specifically since 2019, when we started doing the audits, there have been 52 audit recommendations over the past 5 performance audits. As of December 2024, implementation for 20 of those either remained in progress or had not yet started. That included 1 recommendation from the 18-19 audit, 2 from the 19-20 audit, 5 from the 2020-2021 audit, and all 12 from the 2 most recent audits remained outstanding. And those 12 outstanding audit recommendations comprise the majority, about 60%, which makes sense because there hasn't been a lot of time passed since the issuance of those 2 audit reports. Most of the outstanding recommendations related to PPS's equity programs. Business equity, workforce equity, and career learning equity, with 10 outstanding recommendations related to those areas. Other areas with outstanding recommendations were the CBSE with 4 and construction management with 3 recommendations. So we know that some recommendations just take longer to implement. They're more challenging, more difficult. Although the risk is that delays will impact the intended benefits from the audit, and including demonstration of accountability for the taxpayer. So in this area, since several of the outstanding audit recommendations span multiple PPS offices, not just OSM, we made 1 recommendation in this area, and that is to have executive leadership take more of an active role in overseeing the implementation of the audit recommendations, in setting priorities for the implementation, especially when resources are stretched thin, and in holding staff accountable for timely corrective action. And with that final recommendation, this concludes my presentation. I'll turn it back over to Chair Sullivan, but I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Let's see. I know in the paperwork, Stormy responded to quite a few, almost everything, responded to everything. And much of it has been taken care of. But I'd like to open it up for questions for either Stormy or Kathy. And who would like to go first? I've got some myself, if everybody does. Shall I start? Okay. I noticed on page 19, this is about Jefferson High School modernization, that the board directed OSM to change design plans along the way that impacted cost estimates and schedule. Do staff specifically track the impact of applicable board directed changes? I'm asking because as a board member, I do not necessarily understand all the ways that board directed changes impact the project. If this is not something that is already tracked, I would be interested in having it tracked and moving forward. And also, Stormy, along with that, I know we were kind of made it difficult for you with all our changes. Are we on track now? Are we ready to go, or do we still have to make sure that we've agreed on what's going to happen?
Patty, thank you for the question. I think it sounds like it's sort of a multi-part question, and maybe the first part is for Kathy, about whether you found that staff shared with the board the impacts of board decisions to change designs.
Sure, I can address that. So there's so much information. I mean, oversight boards, committees, Stormy, there's just a lot of information to process and gather. We looked at a lot of presentations. Some have it in there, some don't. It depends on what the nature of the topic is. Where it gets difficult, I think, Director Sullivan, is when you're trying to track it throughout and to know the implications of a decision that you make. And so that's why we were suggesting sort of a short page, 1 to 2, and I know it's hard, you know, and all the board meetings that we look at across all the clients have hundreds of pages for you to all to absorb. And that's why we felt that the 1 to 2 page summary could help, because it might give a quick background. And if you make this decision, here's some pros and cons of it, because there's always going to be pros and cons. You know, it's budget, scope, schedule. That's just the nature of these things. And there's never enough of everything to go around, right? So, you know, that's why we made that recommendation, so that at least maybe with all of the information that the staff does provide you, you could quickly at a glance know what's being asked of you and what the impact of a decision might be.
Okay, so are you all ready now with the plans for the 3 high schools?
For Jefferson, Cleveland, and Wells, we have, as a result of the cost reduction studies, we presented the kind of changes to the scope that we were proposing that aligned with the amount of savings that we saw in those changes. So a little later this summer, we'll present revised comprehensive plans to the board. And those comprehensive plans for each of those projects, they lay out the scope, schedule, and budget for the remaining part of the work to finish design and to construct the project. So you've seen those in the past with all 3 projects, where we have come in and kind of presented the full scope, schedule, and budget for those projects. And those comprehensive plans are very large documents that include a lot of detail. And so what we will come to you with later this summer is the final revised versions of those. That is the output of the cost reduction study, and revising the plans to reflect the scope changes that resulted from that study. And those scope changes from the study resulted in schedule changes as well. So we will be presenting those later this summer to the board.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Let's see. Well, actually, my second question was just answered, so thank you. Let's see what else I have.
But I think maybe I can ask a follow-up question, Director Sullivan. It sounded like you were asking, is there a way for us to let you know more in real time when you request or direct a change in the design, what the impacts might be of making that decision? Is that
Yes,
right?
that's part of it too. Yes, that was the first question, but then you answered my second question.
Okay.
So I appreciate that. Yeah.
You know, in my experience, we don't have a formal way of doing that yet. So that is something we could consider. And I need to put in a little thought into how we would implement that, but I can see the value in understanding more in real time. If we make this decision, if we direct you to do this thing, how might it affect the scope, schedule, and budget of the project? Be clearer about that.
Because we tend to talk forever, so you know, when the end time should be. Also, we talked quite a bit about the BAC and reporting to the board. In looking at that section 5, it looks like the board has a lot of work to do to address some of the concerns. I guess this question is to my board colleagues. How are we going to go about doing this work? It sounded like some of the recommendations were to have the BAC report to the SFI. I wish there was different. SFICO. I know there's already one board member interested in being the board liaison to the BAC, and then perhaps also that person be on the SFICO, and then somehow that committee report get reported to the board so that we all know what's going on. We haven't really had a good way of communicating this last year. So I think that's something Eddie, well, there's Eddie right there somewhere. Yeah, that's something we could talk about. Oh, your hand's up. Perfect. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely right. I just want to say thank you to Kathy for the presentation. I'm very appreciative of this audit, especially in terms of it gives a lot of guidance for board work and board direction, which again, I really appreciate, and this is actually extremely helpful. Yeah, we've actually had a lot of discussions about this in board leadership and also with potential new board members. I think, Patty, some conversation I mentioned to you as well, but I really appreciate the fact that the facilities committee, SFIOC, sorry for that acronym. I always apologize for it. Needs a charter and a purpose and a procedure in terms of or protocols in terms of how it functions and how it works. I think the challenge that we're working on now is how to incorporate the BAC more into the SFIOC committee as well, and how to kind of effectively, right, combine the work of the two groups. So yeah, so this is a big conversation. We do have a new board member who volunteered to be chair, and we've been talking about how to reformat the committee in terms of defining the charter, defining the deliverables, defining the protocol. So yes, that is something I really do appreciate that, and I do want to say that the one thing I really love about this audit too is it kind of calls out some previous choices that were made in the past that have led to not the outcomes that we were hoping for. And I think we have to continue that discussion about how to avoid some of the pitfalls as well. So I don't know if that totally addresses the question.
Yeah, it does. Probably we'll have a board retreat. I hope we can find a time and hash out some of that stuff.
Yeah, that's the plan.
So
Patty, I have a comment.
Oh, yes, go ahead, Julia, sorry.
So in addition to a charter, I mean, having a committee work plan and then having regular meetings that are public, I think will address many of the issues. So again, by pushing a lot of the conversations not in public meetings or in board leadership or just at the staff level, you miss the board's opportunity to exercise its oversight roles. The audit committee has always had an important role as well. So quarterly meetings probably not enough when we have both financial audits, we have internal performance audits, and also the bond audit. And again, there's nothing like a public meeting, I think, to get everybody sort of focused on, are we meeting our milestones? What issues need to be flagged? I think one of the issues you raised about sort of how do we know about the impact of our decisions? Well, having those conversations in public and being really clear about both from the staff perspective, but also the board, I think will go a long way in moving system improvement forward. We used to also have the bond accountability committee chair come to often to the facilities meetings when to provide the report directly. And they also presented frequently not frequently, but on a regular basis to the full board. So everybody, not just the committee members, since they change year by year, sometimes so that everybody had visibility to what the recommendations were and whether we were hitting our milestones, and really gave us an opportunity if things were off track to get on top of, like, did the board need to do something or was it staff action? But that instead of having just a long delay and things sort of playing out without corrective action being taken.
Yeah, that's obviously something we have to look at really carefully. And also in how to deal with all those outstanding audit suggestions on the CBSE and all the equity bit. And that seems to be, I think it was suggested, either do something or, change what you plan to do, change the bond. I don't know how you do that, but we do need to meet those. And Julia, do you have any ideas about that? Because I know you've been around for a long time while it's been here. Yeah.
I'd actually had a question for Stormy that I sent shortly before the meetings, in fairness. Just because of the timing of when the audit was done, the management response, some of them said that the recommendations were going to be completed this spring, but obviously since we're at it now, it's not clear whether the items that had been indicated, there may be fewer recommendations outstanding just because of the lag time. So Stormy, I'm wondering if you could share whether things that had been scheduled to happen in February, March, or April or May, the management letter had indicated they would be completed. Have they been completed, or could you give us a quick rundown on that?
Are you referring to recommendations in this current year 6 audit report?
Yes.
Okay, so the ones that we indicated are partially implemented. And we said, I'm gonna try to find an example here. I think that most of those were.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. What I meant is the ones that were outstanding.
Oh, from the previous reports.
So there was a whole host of them that said, like, to be completed in February, and obviously that got written and then it's happened, but did those ones get completed?
Some of them did and some of them did not. I don't have a detailed update on the previous recommendations. What I do know is that we have made progress on all of the ones that are open. And some of them are a little difficult to pin down a milestone that would indicate they're 100% implemented. And so to answer your question, some yes, some no. And at the next BAC meeting, we'll update the implementation report for the previous audit recommendations and the current audit recommendations, and include that as a materials in that BAC meeting.
Yeah, and Patty, for the audit committee, one thing you can do, thank you, Stormy. One of the things you can do is just like have a short agenda item of 5-10 minutes. It's just a sort of green, yellow, red of the past recommendations. So you can just quickly glance at it and, great job on the things that are green. And then get an update on what's happening with the yellow and red ones. But it gives an opportunity just for a regular check-in, and also an opportunity for staff if they need guidance, or if we're going to declare something complete. If it's 90% there because we think that's not complete, that's how I would approach it, because then it just allows just a regular check-in on things that are still hanging out there from years ago.
There are some items on the previous audits that could use some consideration by the policy committee, maybe around the business equity policy, to sort of reaffirm or reevaluate what the goals are. and we can help in OSM by sort of sharing the trends of what we're seeing, of what we're achieving. But the audit recommendations included things like taking a look at what the goals are and the metrics that we track, and make sure that those metrics are actually helping us understand whether we're meeting our goals or not. So that it's something that I know Andrew Scott had mentioned needed some work, or he would have liked to see some work happen before he left the board.
Yeah, I noticed on that particular one that staff's response, the management response was that an implementation plan was going to be coming to the policy committee.
Yeah.
Not with the particular date. And I briefly had a exchange with Liz Large, who's the liaison for the policy committee. So that's something going forward that's going to be coming in, or you need the policy committee to do something. It should be flagged for her.
Okay.
But that I know of, we had not received anything, or it looks like it's still in the works.
Okay.
Yeah, it looked like some of the things that weren't completed were things that are a little bit esoteric. It's not like you can just do it. So needs to be change in expectations, I think, or at least clear expectations about what should happen. I have a question regarding allocating the the bond contingency funds, or more the leftover funds like we have from Lincoln. And I guess this is to auditors or to you too, Stormy. Do you recommend a formal written plan for allocating that money, including how project savings can be assisted to other bond projects for each of our bond packages? And I'm asking this because how we spend the money that's saved from the 2025 bond may be very different than from the other savings from other bonds. So how would you suggest we go about that?
I can take the first part. As an auditor, we'd always like to see a formal policy or protocols in place that can be replicated each time that you have savings, and it has some integrity to it. So it's not just, and Stormy wouldn't do this, but Stormy wanting to give it to another project. There's some criteria behind, what would be needed. The other thing we can't do as an auditor is be super prescriptive of what you should do, because that's not cool, the auditor, because then we have to come back and, audit or see how the recommendations stand. So you try to give some specificity, but allow the auditee to implement it as it best fit. But we would always recommend something a little bit more formal.
I thought that was a great recommendation because for the last 2 years, I mean, having been here at 2017, when all of a sudden we were short 100 million to finish Benson, and then we had another bond, and then all of a sudden all the cost estimates for the projects all increased, including Lincoln. So when people talked about we had savings, it's like, well, actually it was something like $20 million over what we had told voters when the bond passed it would be. So it always was ironic for me to hear like their savings included. And I'm really glad this got included, because I think sometimes the temptation is we're going to go back and some of the things we value engineered out, we're going to put back in. And my assumption is we're not value engineering out things that are in the education specifications. So they really are like a nicer material or doing something like extra. And just given the state of our elementary and middle schools, I think it is appropriate that we think centrally versus that money belongs to a specific school community, especially when, I mean, the contingencies really, it shouldn't be just like, you get to keep it if you spend less than anticipated. So I really appreciate that, and that in writing, because again, I think that gives everybody clarity on the criteria. The second question I have is, did you, I don't think you mentioned this, at least when I read through the report, doing something similar with the interest earnings, which are other sort of unallocated dollars that get added. And I think, last bond, it was something like 70 to 90 million.
Yeah, we did not look specifically at that, but that would be a very reasonable audit reaction to have any of those unallocated pools have some protocols for how those are going to be allocated to various areas or projects.
So who would set this up? Policy committee, board, Stormy? How, working together, I assume.
With recommendations from staff would be my sense, using the facilities condition index and whatever prioritizations.
Right, I think one thing that we can do, well, I want to clarify what contingency is for. So contingency is a risk management strategy that is meant to cover unforeseen conditions or greater than expected construction escalation costs, schedule delays. So it's to manage the risks of project budgets. So that's the first priority for using contingency. And we tend to consider bond premiums and bond interest earnings as going into the kind of contingency bucket. So after we have passed the point where the risks, where our risks are reduced, that's when we can start to consider using our contingency to fund more actual bond scope. And so what we can do through our updates to the SFIOC and to the BAC is to present recommendations on how not only, first of all, how we're needing to use contingency to cover those risks that actually become realities through the course of projects, but after those risks are over, how we might recommend using the contingency to do additional bond scope according to the priorities that the priorities and the values that the board has communicated with us in the past. So we can present some kind of options and some recommendations about how to use those funds. The use of those funds does have to align with the original bond ballot language, so it can't be something that's outside the scope of the original bond, but there's always plenty of scope to be done within the bond that fits within the bond language that would improve our facilities conditions.
Because this year, we did talk a lot about what we would do with savings.
Yeah.
To the public, so.
Yeah.
Seems like we have to get that somehow in writing. Yeah.
To your last point, Stormy, the 2017 bond language does say on the health and safety piece of things, like at least 150 million. So, you know, the sky's the limit on how much savings you can spend on what we know are some really important projects and still fit within the bond language.
Right. Yeah, health and safety we kind of consider as health and safety and warm and dry environments.
Yeah. So on the health and safety, I don't have any questions on it, but I just want to really call this out and applaud the district for this was sort of the biggest concern of our community in 2017. And I think and the audit demonstrates this was, I thought, a really bright spot in a it's a fairly critical audit, but a bright spot in that the work was prioritized, it was planned, it was completed, and it made, you know, I think really significant improvements in the learning environments and the health and safety of our schools. So I want to just applaud the staff for at PPS for the work they did there.
One thing I noticed about those was that those cost management controls you mentioned or were mentioned that were great for infrastructure projects. They mentioned e-builder. I mean, obviously this is way beyond what I really know about, but can you use similar checks with the large projects? Or is it a whole different system?
No, we have similar processes and procedures and software tools that help us support cost controls on our big modernization projects. Every project that we do, from the biggest down to the smallest, uses our e-builder and follows our cost control procedures during construction.
Okay. I see Eddie has his hand up.
But I just want to make sure you're done with this line of questioning, because I have a completely separate question.
Yeah, I did have a couple more questions about Benson, because it sounded like OSM did everything you could do when you noticed things were wrong. And do you have any questions of, could the board have helped in any way? Was there anything you could have done to get them, I guess, appreciating your concerns? I know you weren't here for most of that, but have you heard what might have been the cause?
I appreciate the question and the offer of letting you know what the board could have done. Honestly, the construction projects of this magnitude and complexity invariably include disagreements between the owner and the contractor. And the contract is built to manage those. So the contract includes claims processes and processes for reviewing change orders and either accepting or rejecting them and negotiating with the contractor about those disagreements. I don't think that there's anything that the board could have done to change any of the outcomes on Benson, and the outcomes on Benson aren't realized yet. So we're in a process of receiving the contractor's claims, which is a standard part of the process. And we haven't, paid anything to the contractor that they aren't contractually due. And we're reviewing their claims for additional payments right now, and also developing our own claims for them, as far as work that we think needs to be corrected or completed according to the contract. So these are all kind of normal processes, especially in a project that's this complex. It was designed during COVID. It was a partial renovation and in a very historic complex building, and a partial addition. And it has a little bit of everything. It's when people walk in there, they say it looks like a community college, and it really does. It's got a lot of complex systems in it for those CTE programs and theater and a cafeteria and a little bit of everything building wise.
So it was maybe just a little bit more complex and more, I was just wondered if you'd had any problems with the other buildings in that way.
The other buildings, we have, it is not uncommon to go into claims processes on construction contracts. So, I can't say for sure if there were any claims on the other modernizations. I haven't looked into that, but I'll say in general, it's not uncommon.
Because I noticed it said that the contractors thought the contract terms were vague and unclear, and just wondered if anybody else had thought they were vague and unclear. It's just really an exceptional situation.
Well, we have already taken a look at our standard CMGC contract and made adjustments to it in response to processes that we thought could be better defined to help us be successful in the future. And so that standard contract has been revised already, and that revised version of the standard contract is attached to the RFP that is out right now for the Jefferson CMGC contract. So we've already made some improvements to that, and we'll continue to look for improvements in the GMP amendment standard version, because that for all three projects will come farther down the road when we negotiate the guaranteed maximum price amendment for these contracts. And so we are taking the recommendations that Schoberg Evishink has had in this report to heart, and we'll be implementing those as we execute those GMP amendments for these projects.
Okay, thank you. And does our legal department look at all those
Yes,
contracts too? Okay.
yes, for sure. Liz and I are very close.
I would imagine.
And we also have external construction counsel that looks at those.
Okay, and then there was just one other little thing about contract construction that I saw. On page 8, it says that we have externally contracted construction managers.
Mhm.
And isn't it a part of the GM or CMGC model to have a construction manager or to be a construction manager?
Yes. So the construction manager, CMGC stands for Construction Manager General Contractor.
Yeah.
There is the part of the contract that is construction manager duties. That scope of services happens in the pre-construction phase.
Okay.
So that's what that means when it says construction manager general contractor. The other way that we use the term contract or construction manager is as an owner's rep during the construction. So we have people that work for PPS on our project teams who are called construction managers, and they act as our owner's representative during the construction phase. So it is a little confusing that term is used in multiple ways and to describe multiple roles on the projects.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. Okay, I'm through with Benson. So Eddie, you have something else?
And I don't know, were you going to ask a high school question? Because I have just a follow on, and it may have already been answered when I got dropped off the call. All the recommendations, Stormy, about sort of coming out about that came out of this audit about the recommendations for changes in sort of a contract approach. Are those being and again, I apologize if that was the answer to Patty's question while I was off briefly. Is that are those being integrated into the Ida B. Wells, Jefferson, and Cleveland sort of planning and contracting process?
Yeah, so for Wells and Cleveland, we already had a CMGC contract executed. So we can make an attempt to negotiate with those contractors some amendments to the contract, particularly when it comes to the GMP amendment, but we're a little more limited in that because that contract's already executed in its form. So for the Jefferson contract, though, we did implement revisions into the standard CMGC contract that's attached to that RFP. So some of the recommendations around clarifying contract terms have already been implemented.
I guess I would hope if there's major changes that need to be made, even if we have existing contracts, that gets integrated. It just seems like we wouldn't want to just continue on and not utilize the lessons learned if they were significant ones and into work that hasn't yet even started.
Yeah, the most significant changes are in kind of how we what we require as far as labor rate calculations, what we're going to pay the CMGC for their own labor, and what we pay for as what's reimbursable costs of the work as general conditions or as direct costs of the work. And those things we have the opportunity to negotiate and set expectations during the negotiations for the GMP amendment. So the most significant changes, we still have opportunities to negotiate about.
Great.
Okay, Eddie, now.
Yeah, it's okay to go. Okay to go.
Mhm.
Awesome, thank you. This question is for both Kathy and Stormy. It's about one of the non-concur items, so hopefully I don't cause a fight. I'm just looking for more background. So thank you for humoring me. The question is about the recommendation, or you mentioned a few times in the report about the not being able to track workload hours, right? And said there are salary employees or not. I'd be able, and also kind of not having a protocol or a format in terms of tracking that. I guess my question, and it seems like, I see the response, which, just to summarize the response, the main takeaway is that, it may not be implementable, but even if it is, it may not necessarily result in improved outcomes. So my question is having protocols or format for tracking workload hours, is that, because I mean, the other thing that also occurred repeatedly throughout the report is that, OSM and PPS in general have been following industry standards, right? And so is tracking of hours and workload, is that an industry standard, or is that something that has been observed in other school districts of similar size with PPS?
So I guess that's a question for me. So industry standards are a funny thing because they are not, you must do this, great criteria or a law that says you have to do that. So it's complicated for performance audits. You have to try to look at peers, like you're saying, in other large school districts. Also, this is an industry area about staffing and how you estimate workload and staffing. So it's sort of two different things, not just specific to schools. The industry guidance, because that's what it is. So it's not you have to do something or not do it, but the guidance suggests that you estimate workload on how long have some sort of task, not every task. These are complicated. Like Stormy says, it's complicated, it's complex. They are all working a lot. But when we're asked to look at, is staffing sufficient to meet the workload, we have to have, how is that workload quantified? So there is general staffing industry that you have to have duration of hours for the effort that's going to take, and then match your staff capacity, which is a little bit easier, right? We know 20-80 hours or how much time people do this or that. And you can link it with those tasks to see if someone is underutilized or overutilized in a quantifiable way as a start, right? There's always, especially on capital projects, has to be flexibility and interpretation, right? It's not just numbers, just like it isn't with contracting or something. There's an evaluative component to it. So we don't always look at staffing at every place we go. When we have done, our firm has done staffing assessments, and when you're doing staffing assessments, industry says you have to have a task, how long it takes, and then match up your staff, especially like if you want, we deal with public sector, so if you want a budget change proposal, if you want a new staff, you have to have some quantifiable data on why you have too much workload and you need a new person to do something. So that's where we're coming from, on those things. So I don't have another school specifically that does that. I know in our own state, I'm in California, LAUSD tracks some of that for its bond programs, because the proposition in our state that sort of is statewide bond money for capital projects requires some of that. And not everybody does everything perfectly great, right? You have asked, this is a great thing that your county has put in place to have these bond audits. So you're looking for improvements. You're trying to demonstrate your accountability. So we are looking and searching at things that some other school districts might not be asking anybody to look at and search for to make improvements on, right? So there wasn't a lot of other good, here's what somebody else does directly. And again, not a right or wrong, just we're not able to say whether somebody was overutilized or underutilized because there's no data that exists for us. And there is industry standards guidance, I should say, out there that suggest tracking it at a more quantifiable level. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's actually great. I appreciate that a lot. Thank you. Yeah, that helps kind of give some perspective. Yeah, I'm also curious, like how related that is to, and this might be more towards Stormy, because I know in the bond documents it allocates something like 5% of the bond for administration.
Mhm.
Is that part of the reason for this non-current, or is it related in some way? Because I assume that with the complexity of our projects in Portland, especially since, I mean, I don't know of any high school that didn't have surprises from some weird thing buried in 1908 that was discovered through this through,
Yeah.
modernization, right? And so I'm just curious, like how much that is related.
The non-concur was really, I don't concur, or staff does not concur with the prescription here of trying to assign a number of hours to each task that's involved in completing a capital project, and then determining the hours capacity of the resources assigned to the project to figure out how many resources to assign. Like that, it just this is our kind of responsibility matrix for tasks that have to be done on a capital project, and there's almost 200 of them. And we don't know how many times each task will have to be executed on a project. For example, requests for information, there were probably thousands of them on the Benson project, for example, and they may range from a simple yes, that's fine, to days of research and going back and forth with the design team and the contractors. So it's not a feasible idea to think that you can assign a number of hours to that a resource will spend on RFIs on a project, and then assign the appropriate amount of resources to answer RFIs. It's not as predictable as that. But I think that there are other states. Washington uses a kind of a formula that's benchmark based on, how much for a project of a certain complexity level and a certain budget, how much of that budget would be spent on owners' costs related to project management. And so we look at those kinds of benchmarks to come up with a staffing plan that is reasonable, and then we assess it as we go. So, we are the staff that work in OSM are professionals, and we report on our capacity every couple of weeks and make adjustments from there. We could make a more formal staffing plan, put it in writing as far as, what we're assuming is the internal project management budget for each project, and show how that's aligning with the assigned staff, and then kind of track at the end of the project, what did we spend? What was the percentage of the project cost spent on internal project management and construction management versus what we budgeted for it? I think we could do a better job of that. And that would help us staff projects in the future. If we see that we're spending a lot more or a lot less than what an industry benchmark would tell us, then we make adjustments.
Great, thank you. That's actually very helpful.
I'm sorry. Anybody, any more questions?
I do have a question about the audit makes some really specific and I think valuable recommendations about the board's work, about the Bond Accountability Committee. But also it makes some recommendations in number 22 around sort of on the staff side of it, the overall management. And the recommendation was setting up a bond project management office function outside of OSM to facilitate and coordinate bond program accountability across the PPS offices, since you have technology, curriculum, the high schools, the modernizations, and then just the repairs and maintenance. And staff did not concur. And I felt like the staff response of not concurring was from a financial standpoint, which is certainly understandable. And I think but I think the issue they were putting on the table was there needs to be this sort of more effective sort of umbrella across offices, oversight and coordination and accountability. And so if not setting up a separate office again, because for financial reasons, I think this is a question for you, Stormy. What would you recommend that would provide this sort of across office accountability? Because it seems like some things like the curriculum was over the estimated budget. You had delays in technology. Obviously we had the high school piece, which were the highest profile, but where would you think that structure should exist? If not how the auditors recommended it?
It's a good question. I need some time to think about it. I have the same thoughts. If we can't really make a whole project management office, what can we do to kind of incorporate it into our existing structures? And especially as we move forward into the 2025 bond, we'll be looking to bring in some kinds of third-party consultants to act as program management and to help us with our reporting and accountability, and what kinds of roles could we fold into that function to help us with the cross-departmental accountability and leadership. So I'm thinking about that, and how can we basically bring it into the structures that we already have to do that better. I don't think we need a new department to do it. I think we can incorporate it into what we've got.
Yeah, not a new layer, but rather an integrated sort of leadership. And the is not at all with criticism. I should have said at the very beginning, we have a new superintendent, a new CFO, new leadership in OSM. I think there's lots of opportunities to sort of reset the structure to ensure that we are utilizing our bond dollars in a cost-effective way, in a coordinated way. And so it's great to see all the new faces or the new leaders on the call. And I say the response to the audit was very, I feel, in the spirit of systems and continuous improvement.
I think I asked this in last December, but with technology and curriculum being part of the bond, should there be on the BAC people with that kind of expertise? I think the answer was not necessarily, because it's more looking at where the money's spent. But would it have helped you, Stormy, to have people with that expertise available, or did you need any of that?
Our BAC chair actually is a technology in the technology industry and is really knowledgeable about that subject matter. We don't have a curriculum subject matter expert on the BAC at the moment, but some of the folks that we do have they have really broad understanding of public funding. And so they've actually been able to provide some pretty good insight into the curriculum, and our curriculum folks do come and present, here's our schedule, and here's how curriculum adoptions work, here's what's required from the state, how we're applying our budget to meet those state requirements. So it seems like it's been working pretty well so far. What the BAC doesn't do is create opinions or recommendations about contractors to use or specific curricula to purchase. Their charge is to look at the scope of the bond as it relates to curriculum and understand and make recommendations to the board about whether the district is meeting those promises. And they have seemed to be able to do that so far.
Okay. Also, there was a recommendation that complete formal contractor evaluations based on project performance and contract compliance.
Yep.
That are discussed with the contractor being evaluated, and you seem to think that was a good idea.
Yes, we already do it internally. So whenever we close out a project or a contract, we have an evaluation form that we complete, but we don't close the loop by actually going over that evaluation with the contractor on a regular basis. So it may happen sometimes, but it's not a required part of the process. So that could help, yes.
Yeah, do you think it would be a good idea to have that be a policy, to have a policy to require that? Or,
We could make it a, part of our standard operating procedures when closing a contract.
and then that could be discussed with the BAC too, if that would be interesting, and also hopefully get back to the board. Or I call it facilities because I can't say all those. Remember all those alphabet numbers.
Still call it the committee, so.
Yeah, right. Okay, of course, there's 100 questions you could ask, but
Caroline, did you have questions?
Thank you. Most of my questions were already asked and answered. I do really appreciate this really thorough report. I did have one question that I'd like to get back to the recommendations that haven't been implemented from past audits, because some of them it's been quite a while, like 5 years. So it would just be helpful to understand like what have been the barriers, like what are the delays to getting those implemented?
That is something that I will add to the implementation plans and the updates that I give to the BAC 1 month from today. So our next BAC meeting is July 23rd, which is also my birthday. So I will, in our updated, in our bond audit recommendation implementation reports update, I'll include, if there are kind of obstacles to completing those implementations and what they are.
Thank you. And if we could see that as well, that'd be helpful.
I think a lot of that has to do with some policy we have to make with those, because we're just not figuring out what to do. And I think that it's going to be a lot of board work on that. How do you feel about that, Eddie, as far as meeting those earlier recommendations that just aren't coming after all these years?
No, thanks for calling on me.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And put me on the spot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
I
the
mean,
CBSE and the equity, those are the two that stand out to me as just sitting there, nothing happening.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to make sure that we put the focus on like effectively moving forward in terms of like how we oversee it and stuff like that. So I think these are real questions, and I'm actually pretty excited to rename the SFIOC. So I apologize to everyone out there. And in terms of, yeah, I guess I would have to think about this a little bit more, because this has to be something that I would probably also with in terms of our policy committee, whether the new formulation with that, trying to figure out what would be the most effective way forward, as well as for our facilities committee, and trying to be outcome focused, right? In terms of, again, repeating what before, a charter and deliverable does need to be defined, so that we can, just streamline the process. But let me think about that a little bit more, and we'll come up with a better answer than that.
Patty, I think in this case, it's more likely a policy with a small p. So it's like sort of how things get operationalized. And I think maybe what they need from the board is more like, what are the values? But then so it's not really a policy with a capital P that's in our policy manual, but more sort of like, what are our values? What's the direction from the board? But it's really sort of operational practices and how it gets implemented and our goals, but less of a actual policy.
Okay, thank you. Hey, any more questions or comments?
I had a question about the technology.
Mm-hmm.
I was really surprised reading through that when I read it, it seems like we just sort of let the clock run on the contracts that actually were inflexible versus for some pretty, it looks like some pretty important school-based technology installations. That things were supposed to be implemented or installed by this year are now on a 2029 cycle. And so this is, and again, we have a whole new team here, so this is more, maybe it's I guess the question just sort of like, how did we just let something go for 4 years versus like, was there some other action we could take, or did staff look at, like, there's no way for us to get out of these inflexible contracts, so we're just gonna let them run out and then move ahead? It seems like, I'm trying to think, or recall this being flagged as hey, we need to do something different because we don't have the technology that we promised schools installed. So this is more of like, what, going forward, like, how do things like this get flagged? So again, it's a 4-year delay that doesn't happen. So this is more of like a problem solving for the future, or how do we catch things like this?
That's a good question. That's one I'm gonna have to take offline. I'm not as familiar with the kind of the root cause of that delay. And so I need to go back to the technology team, and we can dig into what that root cause was and see what kind of indicators in the future would we look for to be those flags on that.
Strange, because it says that it was related to like the vaccine mandate we had, but it's like, okay, that seems so long ago now. So yeah, it would be, I think it just kind of having at least some sort of public explanation of like, here's how we tackle this in the future versus just letting the contract run its course and then moving ahead.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions? Thank you, everybody. Lots of stuff in there. Thank you, Stormy. You answered everything really well. And thank you, Kathy, for the presentation.
Stormy's got it. Right, John?
I do have one quick
I
question.
got
if you don't
John
mind.
Franco here.
Oh, we
Sorry,
got another
in the
question.
midst of leadership, so.
Also, Janice
Oh,
had
look, I
her
got
hand up.
questions up. I've got Janice, I'll call on you first. You haven't had a chance.
Thank you. Kathy, I noticed in the report on page 48 where you're talking about what OSN could do to enhance the like a 2-pager for the board. And you mentioned that some other school districts do that. Is there any way you could send me an email with the names? Because seeing an example of what you're talking about would be really helpful if you wouldn't mind.
I absolutely can. I will say they are not school districts. So there are other public sector entities with large capital projects like this. So in our minds, it would be great if it's a school district, but it's the same. They're dealing with the same portfolio, even sometimes more volume. But yes, I'll send you some examples of those.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Julia.
Yeah, I was curious, are you closing out the meeting?
No, I'm just asking for more questions, so.
Okay. I wasn't sure if you were closing out the meeting because I had some just like closing comments. So I'll hold off if we're still in the question period. I am curious about again, going back to this the oversight, and we talked a little bit about staff, and Stormy's going to come back about that, but about the board's oversight and also sort of the coordination with the Bond Accountability Committee. I'm curious, now that we have a fully staffed Bond Accountability Committee, yay, good job. Would this audit be presented to them, or will we like send them the audit and then they get a video of today's meeting? It seems like they have a lot of technical expertise, and again, so the board's not working in silos, or it's not just the facilities committee and then the board off doing something else and then the Bond Accountability Committee. But how will that get integrated? Because it seems very important that they also kind of are involved in this reset.
Yes, they will get the same presentation. Probably they'll get a presentation of the year 6 audit report as well from Schoberg Evershank. So Kathy, maybe you can speak a little more about if it's the same presentation or if you cater it differently for the BAC.
Usually not. It is usually the same presentation. It just might be if they have different questions or answers or anything, but yeah.
Good. Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, I'll go. Anybody have comments? I didn't even think about that, Julia, till you said it. Anything? Okay.
I do have some comments.
You don't, okay. Yes. Comment.
Anybody else who had anything they want to say? Okay.
I know that Janice does in a minute, but go ahead, comment.
Okay. Well, first I wanted to thank the auditors. You know, it's a prime example, today's audit's a prime example of the importance of independent auditing and how it can be used for continuous improvement and to drive cost-effective use of our dollars, ensure that our, the tax dollars we have are being spent in ways in which we, have the resulting modernized, healthy, safe, accessible schools that we promise voters. So I really want to share appreciation for the auditors. You've been along for the ride for the last 6 to 7 years, and I think provided really valuable guidance. I also want to note that the number and scope of the audit recommendations is fairly unprecedented. And as I said earlier, that the recommendations are for the 23-24 school year. So different superintendent, different CFO, different head of OSM. And so I'm hoping that these will be embraced in the spirit of sort of continuous improvement. And so I think none of the recommendations should be as a reflection of sort of the current team's work, but a way to guide the work going forward. I do think for the board, we have new board and new executive leadership, and it's really, I believe, a call to action that we need to be continuously, that our work is better and we get better outcomes when there's transparent oversight and sort of continuous reporting to the general public and to the public body that's elected to sort of and accountable generally to the public. I hope that the audit recommendations are discussed more in depth with the whole new board, and there's some sort of mechanism for sort of a continuous improvement cycle that is visible to the board and visible to the broader community that is paying a fair amount of taxes for something that is really important to this community. So I really, again, appreciate the auditor's work and staff's set of responses and the sort of forward-looking nature of the work. I think it's really timely given the construction of that's ready to happen with, hopefully, with Jefferson, Ida B. Wells, and Cleveland. So I'm going to wish everybody good luck. And I also want to thank Caroline for, since this is my last audit committee meeting, for your participation as a community member in the audit committee. On a completely separate note, before the meeting concludes, I want to submit some questions for the record for the audit committee related to the Health and Welfare Trust audit that I have requested and not yet received. And so I'll just be sending that to Kara or Roseanne just to put in the record. But thank you again, everybody. Patty, you were a great audit committee chair. So really well done. I think you kept us sort of on track and provided visibility both to our internal audits, our financial audits, and the bond audits in a ways that improved the board's work.
Oh, thank you. A lot had to do with Janice teaching me, but anyway, I worked at it. Okay, Kara, is there any public testimony?
There's not.
There's not. I thought you'd say that.
Great.
Janice, do you have any comments you'd like to make before we wind it up?
Yes, Director Brim Edwards beat me to it, but today is her last audit committee meeting. And I just wanted to take a minute to say thank you for serving on the audit committee quite a few times during your tenure at PPS. I know when I first started, you were the first chair of the audit committee, and in addition to making time to meet with me on a regular basis and not missing those meetings, I really appreciated that you prioritized, that work to help support us getting started. And, but also, your willingness to get on the committee this year, even though you were chairing a different committee. I just really appreciate your ongoing support. And just wanted to make sure and thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. Thank you, Julia. Okay, I will close the meeting with just a few updates for the audit committee. First, thank you to those of you who provided input into our internal auditor's performance evaluation. I was able to combine all the input and feedback. I met with Janice to go over the evaluation with her, and I have sent the final signed performance evaluation to HR. Next, this will be our last audit committee meeting for the 24-25 school year. In our last audit committee, our internal auditor asked audit committee members for input on future audit topics. I wonder how many times I just said audit. Goodness. Although we ran out of time to get that process completed during this school year, Janice said she will still be in touch with you all over the summer to gather that input and feedback, and we will get that item on our first audit committee meeting in the fall. Thank you for your service on the audit committee this year, Julia and Eddie, and this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.
Done. Goodbye.